Hello, hello. I'm Tanya Khazanov, and you are listening to Human and Holy. Today, I'm going to be answering some questions submitted by listeners of the podcast. I'm consistently amazed by the depth of the Human and Holy community, and through the questions that come through, I get such a sense of the depth and wisdom and spiritual engagement that is present for this community, and I don't for a second take for granted the time spent writing up your thoughts, sharing them, asking follow-up questions, really taking these conversations seriously. Each one informs the conversations that we have, moves me, allows me to get to know you better and what your needs are and how to best address those through the podcast. So let's get started. My goal is to keep each answer short and light. This is not a deep dive into the topics, but just like my quick kind of like hot take on the topic. So let's get started. How do you stay connected to your spirituality while raising small children? I find this season to be so overwhelming and consuming, and I'm left feeling disconnected from my deeper self in this area and unable to stay connected to my Judaism in the same way that I did in the past. Whew. My favorite topic, motherhood and spirituality. Can those two things coexist? Can a full sense of aliveness coexist with motherhood? It's also such a personal topic to me because this has been such a journey and personal process for me over the last couple of years of motherhood, of just finding my rhythm when it came to my spiritual practice and connection and ensuring that I could remain connected spiritually in a way that also honored the season of life that I am in. Anyone who is not in the season of having small children, especially if you are pregnant or have a baby who is not sleeping through the night, cannot even fathom, even if you've been there and done that, or if you have close friends who've been there and done that, the level, how consuming that experience is and that time of life is, and how hard it is to think outside of the bubble of early motherhood, especially if you are juggling a lot and not sleeping properly and not able to care for yourself at the level that you usually are. You're probably not operating at like an optimal level of functioning. So first there's that, a lot of grace. Like you're in a season of life that's just very taxing and physically taxing, and that's going to be taxing also on your emotional and spiritual headspace, and you're not necessarily going to have the capacity in the same way that you used to, and it's just for right now. That was something that really comforted me at times, but then there was also a point where that was no longer holding for me. It was like, okay, right now, but right now I also want to feel connected, and right now I also want to feel good, and right now I also need to feel like myself. So I'll share what has worked for me, and maybe this will open some type of window for you. One thing that has worked for me is creating commitments, spiritual commitments that are pleasurable and enjoyable, that could hold me accountable to becoming more spiritually connected, even when life was consuming and I didn't have so many pockets of time to invest in my spiritual self or study or that part of who I was. So an example of that would be gathering with a few friends to study once a week. This is an example of something that is a spiritual space to plug into and also creates a sense of spiritual community too, but is pleasurable and enjoyable. You're seeing friends and it's something that you can prioritize in a way that feels like light and easy. I also think you have to take into account where you're holding. Like if you're at 30% brain functioning, then you might want to set up a spiritual study that is like very light and easy to digest and feels very grounded. And if you are sleeping through the night or don't feel so overwhelmed by your life and are at optimal brain functioning and you want to do something that's more scholarly or studious or exploring more deeply, and you would be able to look forward to something that was just a more rigorous type of spiritual study, then do that too, but create a commitment to someone outside of you or to a class or purchase a course or whatever it is where you have some type of commitment that's holding you accountable to it, because that has been like the greatest help for me in motherhood, not just with spiritual practice, but also when it comes to like physical well-being and emotional well-being, to have things outside of me that I commit to when I'm in a clearer state of mind so that it kind of is baked into the rhythm of my life and it's not something that I'm constantly fighting for. Because I think for me, when I become spiritually disconnected, if I have nothing baked into my life that rhythmically takes me to a connection to my soul and is not something that I'm actively working towards, but is just part of life, the same way every other part of life is. So I am connected to my soul because I have a time of day when I study with a friend. So just little pockets like that that allow for spiritual spaces to exist in your life in a way that's baked into your existence. And also, so much grace for the season of life that you're in. There are so many different seasons throughout our lives, and some of them might be more about spiritual striving, and some of them might be about spiritual acceptance and settling in to what God is asking of us. And With that said, of settling into the space that God is clearly putting us into, I also do want to say that if you're in that space and you feel like your Judaism is like losing all of its sparkle, or you are losing all of your sparkle, then it's okay to want more for yourself. And it's okay to say, yes, I'm in a busier season of my life, or yes, I'm in a more consuming part of my life, but I still want to feel spiritually connected. And that call and that yearning and that longing is often a signal of like, there's more space for this to be more baked into your life. That's been my process. So I'm just sharing it with you, and maybe it will offer something. Thank you for that question. Like, I feel like we're sisters in this, because this is a big part of my life, and a big part of the seasons of my life is learning to stay spiritually connected while also being very connected to the mundane tasks of raising small children. How do you mature into your Judaism in your own way if your upbringing is not holding up in adulthood? First of all, I think everyone has this experience. There's no way that a childhood version of Judaism is going to hold up into adulthood. And the way that I like to think about a Jewish education, a spiritual education that we receive, is that it is the scaffolding for us to then build our own foundation and our own construct of what Judaism and spirituality is going to be in our lives. So I know that I have definitely had this experience where I would be trying to build something sturdy and steady and adult and everlasting on a piece of scaffolding that I received as a child. And it felt so wobbly and did not hold up to the nuances of life. And I felt so frustrated with the weakness of the concept. And when I shifted my perspective on what a young education is, like childhood, high school, seminary, all of those pieces of our life, I began to see them for what they were, not expect more from them than what they could give me, and actually begin to build a Judaism that was my own. So scaffolding is obviously what is built alongside the construction site in order for the workers to be able to reach the levels that they need to be able to lay that foundation and then build from there with like solid material. Our young childhood education creates that construct for us to build off of so that we could begin to build our own foundation. When we begin and mature into adulthood, I really believe we are starting at the bottom. We have to dig beneath the surface. We have to lay new foundations. We're not just building level 10 from whatever we had before. We are starting over. We are starting again. And the gift of education, of childhood, of receiving a spiritual education is that we do have so much perspective, is that we were able to kind of climb to a higher level where we could see so much through our education, but we can't build off of those things. Those things are not steady or sturdy or deep enough for us to be able to build an entire life off of. So just shifting my perspective personally to the way that I saw a childhood version, a young version of Judaism versus an adult version of Judaism was so helpful to release the expectation that a childhood version of Judaism should be steady or sturdy or enough to build our lives off of. And suddenly the unsteadiness that you feel in your maturing in your Judaism and religion and connection to spirituality is actually a positive sign that you are starting to build something that is your own. It's just a little nugget about this topic, but I think that even just that perspective can help align us on where we should be holding when it comes to building our own, maturing into our own relationship with our Judaism, and also to recognize that it's a complete lifelong process. And as we go through different life shifts, we're going to be building deeper and more stories and decorating the rooms with more depth and more wisdom and more nuance and more understanding. And that expansion is going to continue to happen. So if your young version of Judaism is not holding up, it's not because it was flawed, but it's because it was never meant to. You cannot build any adult relationship off of a 7-year-old version of it. So welcome to the club. We're all just getting started. And that to me is what feels so exciting about my relationship to my Judaism is I'm just getting started. I'm starting from the ground up, and there is so much to build and so much to settle into and so much to learn and so much to expand on. And that maturing process is going to take my entire life, and I'm settled in for the ride. I'm ready. Okay, next question. What does the concept of a Kerasa bias, foundation of the home, practically mean? I love this one, and I'll just give a 30-second version of this. To me, being an Kerasa bias means that my family's units, spiritual engagement, nervous system capacity, emotional headspace is rooted in my spiritual engagement, nervous system capacity, and emotional headspace. So my work as an Akara Sabayas is expanding my own spiritual engagement, passion, and excitement, expanding my own ability to stay calm, grounded, and regulated through the ups and downs of life, and my ability to be in an emotional headspace that's honest and balanced and has space for joy and sorrow and the emotional experience of life. So to me, what it is that my presence in the home is an honest reflection of what's going on inside me, which means being the foundation of the home is an inside job, in my opinion. It's an inner work that we do. Obviously, none of us do it perfectly, and I certainly don't. So that's my goal, is to recognize how whatever environment or temperature is created in my home is something that is being rooted inside of me. And so if I want to create a certain environment for my family unit to flourish in, then I have to first create that internally. Our homes are an energetic space. I think that's why when we're young, I remember when I was away for high school, if my mother would come to visit, I felt like I was home, even though I hadn't actually traveled home, because she contained my home within her energy and spirit. And I think that to me is the notion of being the foundation of the home. It's not necessarily a physical space or containment, but it's a way of being and of welcoming others into that inner experience. And even for anyone who doesn't have children or hasn't been blessed with children or is in a state where they don't have that, I believe that this ability to be the foundation of a home is something that's accessible to anyone, creating an environment within yourself that gives a sense of home to others. And I have definitely had this experience where I meet someone and just speaking to them and connecting with their energy feels like a homecoming, feels like they have so much space and generosity of their own spirit and such a regulated, spiritually connected, and emotionally honest sense of self that I feel at home in their presence. And someone that comes to mind that you have met on the podcast is Lori Novick. She has that Akara Sabayas energy where it was my first time meeting her and I felt this motherly connection to this woman and this feeling of this woman can contain the Jewish home. And even the way that she showed up and spoke felt like she was containing others in her experience and was able to share naturally of a very balanced and spiritually connected inner world that to me is like the definition of what it means to be the foundation of the home. And especially because we obviously welcome others into our home and into our inner worlds, this is not something that is limited just to our family unit, but I think is central in the way that we show up in the world, which is seeing the energy of home as being central to a healthy society and one that is spiritually expansive. Okay, the next question is such a favorite to me and something that has been such a theme in my life lately. Do you have any insights on building spiritual female friendships as an adult, wife, and mom? This is a topic that I actually didn't have such a real appreciation for the necessity of up until a couple years ago, when I really shifted my perspective on female friendships, on the power and potency of platonic love, and how deep, meaningful, honest, fun, lighthearted, enjoyable, natural connections with other women can really support us in living a life that's connected to our souls. There's a whole holistic picture when it comes to having a truly spiritually connected life. And when you want to stay connected to deep, true Torah values and you want to live a life of growth, having other women to be able to connect to in an honest, vulnerable, thoughtful, and deep way is so crucial to being able to stay connected to your soul's voice in this world. Now, why is this a recent development for me? My bar for female friendship was always, if we could not speak for 8 months, but then reconnect like no time had passed, then like that was the mark that like we were true friends. Because my mark for friendship was kindred spiritness and this like natural connection where we just got each other, we saw each other for who we were, and we were able to just get each other and meet each other both on a soul level and on a lighthearted level and just flow with each other and like be able to meet each other and like speak each other's language. But over time, and actually I really credit a friend of mine who shows up completely differently in friendships than anything I'd ever experienced and who shifted the way that I show up to any friendships afterwards, although obviously I don't do it perfectly at all. But she treats her adult friendships like real relationships that she invests time in, that she supports, and that she truly sees as like a priority in her time and energy in her life. And she's a very busy person. So experiencing that made me aware of what friendship could be in terms of being a consistent piece of joy and connection and support in our lives and how we can offer that to others. Having that support and that ability to just stay connected to each other in a deep, real way and also make space for fun and lightheartedness with each other, because often in the seriousness and intensity and the hardships of life, we don't always have space for play and creative for play and expansive and creative joy and just talking and having a good time and just like leaning into the lightness of life. And I think that's something that we could uniquely experience with other women. So when it comes to actually cultivating these relationships, because I think we all know what the bar is and what we want, but I do think for myself that even beginning to cultivate those relationships first came down to identifying what it was I wished for and what it was that I desired and what I wished to build with other women. So if there's a Torah class in your neighborhood, or if there's even a Torah class online, if you are interested in making virtual friendships, which can also be really deep and rich, but finding spaces where women connect to each other over spiritual concepts, over spiritual ideas, over Torah values is often a space where you're also going to find like-minded women who are interested in cultivating a deeper and more spiritual friendship, where you can be connected not only over the daily grind of life, which is wonderful too, and we need that connection as well, but also over the deeper parts of our experience and our existence. And if you don't have access to these type of spiritual spaces, if there are no Torah classes happening around you that you think like really like jive with what you're looking for, I would say tough love, but you have to be the one to create it. And because people's lives are so busy, and even if someone meets you in passing and feels connected to you, or even if you have one good conversation with someone, wonderful, lovely, but people are so consumed by their life. But if you are in a space where you're intentionally seeking out friendship, I do think that you need to use that intention to actively be the one to initiate what it is that you hope to create, and not to wait for anyone else to create it with you or to reach out to you or to initiate, but to be the one to kind of put that foot forward. I think that taking ownership over initiating and creating that space, or even creating gatherings where you may connect with other women and encouraging people to bring their friends or people that they think would connect to that vibe, or if you're creative, creating creative spaces, or whatever it is where you think you can meet like-minded people that may lead to a deeper sense of friendship. And even if you don't cultivate one-on-one relationships in that area, it can also just be such a gift to have that sense of like spiritual or creative community that allows you to just connect on the deeper parts of life. We do live in such a lonely society. So many of us are doing this so alone. And if you don't have close, meaningful, deep relationships as a woman, as a wife, as a mom, I think that's very normal. And that's what many, many of us experience, but we could have more and we could go deeper, and it is possible, but it takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes intention, and it takes time and patience for that to unfold in the way that we wish for. But even just holding the vision of what you imagine it could be and then showing up to be that person to others, I think is the beginning of it, and for me has been the beginning of it. So I hope that's helpful. What is the balance between raw chassidus and a down-to-earth style of learning? I love this question. Interesting. Okay, there's so many directions that I could take this. Raw chassidus and a down-to-earth style of learning. So I don't know exactly how this person is defining what is considered raw chassidus versus a down-to-earth style of learning. There are different segments of chassidus and different sections and areas, and some seem to naturally be much more down-to-earth, and some seem to be much more raw and aloof and mystical and need to be drawn down, and some just kind of remain in that spiritual mystical space and seek to like bring us to somewhere beyond ourselves. The way that I look at it is that study is a process, and that there is the beginning of study is an openness to something beyond my own self and beyond my own life. So I open up the text and I begin to read, setting aside my preconceived notions. I'm setting aside everything else I know, and I'm not making all of those connections. And I'm just like receiving everything that there is to know. And very often there's not 100% clarity at this period of study. So this is like the raw period of study where we just open ourselves up to the text, to the information, to the ideas, to the knowledge. And then there's the Bina process of exploring it. And this is where I say, bring your full self to the table, like all of your struggles, all of your questions, all of the past experiences you've had, all the other things you've studied in other bodies of work or texts, be it Chassidus or other areas of Torah, things that you might think contradict, things that you think play a role, whatever it is, like bring it all to the table. And I think that that's a piece that in the past, sometimes I have not done and has not allowed me to reach that state of das, of like true integration of the ideas in my life, because I was missing a crucial step, which is bringing myself to the table of my study, not just jumping from experiencing the raw ideas, that chachma, that openness, that curiosity and excitement, and that awareness that there's something beyond myself, there's a mystical world that I can't see, and I'm going to set aside my worldview and my own experience of daily life to just receive this mystical teaching, and then waited for it to affect my daily life, and waited a long time. Okay. So the next critical piece of study is, I think we don't choose between raw Torah and a down-to-earth style of learning. I think it's raw Torah, down-to-earth style of learning, integration, experience of those ideas in our lives. So it's a process of study. And I think that for every person at different points in your life, and also depending on where you are in your education, what that Ruach HaChassidus will look like will be different. But I think that that's the process and the experience that we have. And also just something else that's coming to mind is that in chapter 5 of Tanya, we speak about how the act of Torah study is an act of intimacy with Hashem, and it has value in and of itself. So even just sitting down to connect with the Torah, even studying something that has zero practical application on our lives, is an extreme act of presence and connection with the divine. So there is so much value to Torah study, even when it does remain in its raw state and we don't see its like integrated experience in our lives, and it doesn't necessarily have that down-to-earth quality of integration into our own experiences. There are different pieces of Torah and they affect us differently. If you're going to study the laws about the Holy Temple that are not relevant right now when we're living in a state of exile, that is still going to be an act of deep connection with the divine and has extreme value in and of itself. And I also think that there's such value to just being lifted, and to being lifted to that mystical state and being lifted to that world of divinity and Torah. And just that awareness and that connection to the divine can put other things into perspective. But again, do you see how I'm just naturally showing like the benefit of it? I do believe that it doesn't have to have a benefit in that way that we can see it trickle down, but actually just the act itself, just showing up to study Torah, is an act of extreme presence and connection with the divine. And the Alter Rebbe goes into this in great detail in Tanya, how profound the connection of a human being is with God, with our Creator, when we do sit down to study Torah. So I think that both are important, both have a place. So hopefully we can experience both those rigorous experiences of raw Torah study that we don't necessarily see the natural application to our lives, and trust that we are connecting with the divine in that moment, and also having experiences of studying the raw information and then being able to translate that and bring our full selves to the table and explore it and process it so that it does become integrated into our lives and experiences. And there's also more casual ways of study, or even just spiritual gatherings where concepts that we may have studied about or heard about can become more integrated and personal to us in our lives. But I think often where the gap is for many of us is either we're focusing too much on the raw study or we're focusing too much on the integration, and there's no information or there's no legs for the integration to stand on. So we just have these like floating sentences or words, which without a lot of depth or context behind it, and then we're struggling to integrate it because it doesn't have so much substance. So basically, I think that we really need both in our lives if we want to experience that integration, and that there's value just to the integrative experiences, like if we're bringing or gathering, and there's value to just the Torah study, even if it's not relevant to us and is lifting us above our lives. What does it mean to make a keli? Practical ways to put your effort in the right places. What does it mean to make a vessel? First of all, you are the vessel. You are the vessel. You are the vessel for God's blessing. You are the vessel for God's creation. You are the vessel. You don't have to create anything outside of you. You have to be who you are and to show up as who you are. And that is going to create the vessel for everything that you wish to receive. So what's coming to mind is so random, but it's a talk that I heard from Jerry Seinfeld, who gave a speech at graduation. And he said, don't focus on having, focus on becoming, and the having will take care of itself. And I think that when it comes to receiving in our lives and receiving so much blessing in our lives, sometimes we focus on how can we create a vessel to receive everything that I need to. But sometimes when we just really tune into becoming the vessel for God, becoming who we are, getting more attuned to our divine souls, then everything that we wish to receive naturally finds us and flows through who we naturally are as people. But to the second half of the question of like finding the right places to put our efforts into, I really think that you got to go based on the vibes. You have to just follow the breadcrumbs, the small intuitions and curiosity. And this sounds nice, and I think I might be good at this, and maybe I could offer something here, and I am interested in this area. And just kind of like we are driving in the dark, but we have headlights and we can see 1 foot in front of us. And it's just this feels like the next step based on everything I know about my soul and about my Judaism and about where I want to go and what I want to create. And just like really being led and guided by like that subtle intuition. Because this is such a short question, it is possible that I totally didn't answer the question that the questioner asked, but that's what came up for me in response to this question. And feel free to submit more and we can talk further on this topic. I think that this is like a very big topic in our lives and cannot be reduced to 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to end off with this last question, not the last question on our list, but the last one for now. Do you have any advice for spiritual ruts? I have my lived experience of entering into many a spiritual rut. I think this is just the cycle and experience of life, which is that we come in and out of connection to a really engaged spirituality. And that's part of the process and part of the story and exactly how it's meant to be. So I think I'm just going to share like my thoughts and reflections on spiritual ruts as opposed to advice, because how to get out of a spiritual rut is just, it's not my style. And I just don't think that's helpful. But my thoughts and reflections on spiritual ruts, getting in them and getting out of them. I often think that spiritual ruts are a gift in disguise. We get into a spiritual rut because we are ready to move to the next level of spiritual connection, maturity, deepening of our Judaism, and we need a signal that it's time to change things up. And because we often don't respond to like subtlety and nuance, we usually need to enter into some type of like actual rut for us to think, something has to change. And so in my life and my experience, every spiritual rut has been a signal and a catalyst for enormous growth afterwards, and a sign and a reminder that like it's time to grow, it's time to expand, it's time to explore more, it's time to pay more attention to your Judaism. A rut was just a signal of something is ready to change. And it doesn't feel like this in the moment. In the moment, it can just feel dark and unclear and disconnected. But I think that over time, I've really seen the pattern that it's an awakening to deeper spiritual connection and deeper connection to Hashem. So if you're having that experience and you feel like stuck and lost and disconnected in that way, I think it's just hopeful to remember in that space that this is not a bad thing, and this is a healthy, positive thing, which is going to catapult you to the next season and stage of your spiritual connection. I think it's obviously so different for everyone, but recently I had this experience of curiosity being the gateway out of disconnection. So when you are feeling disconnected, finding like that tiny little opening of curiosity and interest, and I would want to know more about that, or I would want to be more connected to that person or that space or that thread of Torah study or that way of spiritual connection or whatever it is, like a tiny little opening, a tiny little thread. I'm a little bit curious about something. And especially when you're in kind of that unfeeling space, when you're either bored or questioning or cynical or wherever you're at, finding a small glimmer of curiosity and interest is like, can become like a lifeline and something that will open up, something that is so far beyond whatever small and narrow space you find yourself in, and will show you the path that obviously isn't out and back into where you were, but is in a totally different direction and somewhere richer and different, and integrates the teachings and the learnings that you experienced in your rut and in your questions and in that cynical space, and brings you to like a whole new way of being. And I do think that in our Judaism and in our lives, we experience many deaths and many evolutions and many opportunities to just deepen our connection to Hashem. And often it does take a real descent, a yerida, l'tzarach aliyah, for the sake of that ascent. And the descent itself is the ground and the fertile soil for whatever growth is going to come next. So it's not something to run away from. It's something to dig into and to deepen into, because from the descent itself comes the ascent. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Obviously, none of my answers were exhaustive, but hopefully offered something on each question or deep idea that was presented or asked. And if you enjoyed this segment, I would love to hear about it. And if you have any questions that you would love to hear in possibly, maybe, who knows, a part 2 of a Q&A style segment, then let me know. Send us an email at info@humanandholy.com or message us on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. I so enjoyed this, and we'll talk next week.
אלוקיי זכני נא בתורתך ובמצוותיך, לחבר את נשמתי תמיד אליך, לחבר תמיד אליך.